let's talk about the cult of self-hatred. Whose self-hatred, you might ask? Well, you know where I'm going with this one, which is white people being taught to hate themselves from birth. Why is it that this happens? How is it that this happens? Let's take a look. But first, if you don't hate yourself, if you have respect for yourself and want to create more opportunities for yourself and make yourself smarter, you should buy this. Islander Volume 2, which is the Lotus Eaters official magazine now. We've got some wonderful articles in here from people like myself. Josh wrote a poem for it. We've got articles from people like Dave the Distributist, from The Golden One.
Stefan Molyneux.
Stefan Molyneux decided to come out of hiding. So
Nima Parvini.
Nima Parvini. We've got plenty of excellent content in there.
Raw Egg Nationalist.
You can stop now.
Harry Robinson.
I already said me. There's lots of fantastic articles in here, so it's well worth a read, and it is limited for a very short time only. They will be available through the website. We're not doing pre-orders. They are printed upon order, so once you order yours, you should receive it within about 2 to 3 weeks, and they will be limited, so only for about a month, maybe a month and a bit, will you be able to get a hold of these. So get them now before they're all gone. Also, get the merchandise that we have here. Get a For England poster. Get a mug. Get this awesome Islander metal t-shirt. This is fantastic. I want one. I need one, or I'll cry. Anyway, moving on. So, the first thing I wanted to look at is this recent article from The Guardian, published earlier on today, around first thing in the morning, in fact, talking about the UK English curricula should focus on inclusive and diverse stories according to a particular author.
Is that the author there?
Yes.
They should stop reading other people's stories. They should read my stories, says woman.
Exactly, yes. I wonder, she should also put down the fork, but this is obviously motivated reasoning. You wouldn't get this sort of argument unless you were a fifth columnist in a foreign country who wants to put your own position first.
I'm going to move to China and say, you need to stop reading Chinese stories. You need to start reading more white people's stories, all right?
Yeah, have you ever heard of Shakespeare, China? He's who you should be reading.
You should read me.
So this woman is an ex-children's laureate, Mallory Blackman, who said that no student should feel that English is irrelevant because they do not see themselves reflected in the literature. So this is just complete narcissism, erasure. This is the thing that could only happen as a result of demographic replacement coming to the schools, because who are these students who don't see themselves reflected in the literature?
Well,
if an English student who is English is reading English literature,
also
shouldn't they see themselves reflected?
There's also the point that a lot of English literature transcends England, right? It can also be read in the rest of the UK for a start. And, you know, there are people in Scotland, no doubt, that read English authors and vice versa. And also in the rest of Europe. You know, you can ask an Italian, do you know Shakespeare? They'll probably say yes. Have you heard of Shakespeare's plays? Probably yes.
Well, Romeo and Juliet is set in Italy.
Verona, yeah.
Yeah, and you don't have to be Italian to appreciate it.
It's also just a very stupid person thing to say. Just like, this person isn't exactly like me, and therefore I don't enjoy the story. When I watched WALL-E, the Pixar film, I think it is. It's probably DreamWorks or something.
It is Pixar.
Okay. I knew someone would be like, actually. But when I watched that, I didn't think, well, I'm not a robot, I'm not enjoying this.
I'm not a small rubbish-collecting robot falling in love, so I can't appreciate this whatsoever. No, there are universal themes that can be transmitted through media, but a lot of these people, one, are narcissists, and they legitimately can't appreciate a media unless the people it focuses on look and behave exactly like them. And two, of course, she's going to say this because she wants her own books in schools.
Well, it's fundamentally all of this ideology amounts to resource extraction from the native population. That's what it is. We have resources that they want, and they will use any means necessary to take them from us.
Yeah, and this is all aided by the government. So this woman, Mallory Blackman, was the author of a book series called Noughts and Crosses, which I actually remember learning about when I was younger and in school. And she said all of this in the foreword to a Literature in Colour campaign report and so that it could try to encourage more children to read for pleasure. I think that's a great idea. More children should read, especially in the era of social media, but of course what they read is just as important. She also said that no child should feel that studying English at schools is irrelevant because they never see themselves in it. There will always be room for the classics in the UK English literature curricula, but a space and place needs to be made for more inclusive and diverse contemporary stories across all educational boards. So that's bollocks, right?
By the way, this even went on growing up in South Devon in a very, very majority, as majority as it can possibly get, white British area. And we had to read a book called Gangster Rap. I think that's by Benjamin Zephaniah.
Oh, not that one.
It was awful as well. It was utter drivel.
Of course.
And I was just like
poetry.
Yeah, I was just like, why are we reading this? We were reading Shakespeare a minute ago. Now we're looking at some people who are actually trying to be criminals. Like, also showing that to teenagers, just like, here you are, here's how to be a criminal. Is that really good?
It's terrible example to set. But also, what she was saying there, obvious rubbish, because you only have a limited amount of time to cover particular stories over the course of a curriculum, over the course of a school term. So, of course, if you want to put one extra thing in, one other thing's going to have to be taken out. So the idea that it's this equal game where you can have as much time. No, it's a zero-sum game. If your book gets in, somebody else's gets taken out. The campaign, this Literature in Colour, was created by Penguin Books in 2020 in partnership with the Runnymede Trust, of course, aiming to help schools make the teaching and learning of English literature more inclusive for writers of colour. Completely selfish motivation. It was launched, guess when? After the global Black Lives Matter protests, which should have had no effect and nothing to do with Britain. It was nothing to do with us. And they inspired campaigns to diversify the curriculum in schools. So this is all about getting children as young as possible, essentially, because a lot of these books are not written for the sake of literature, they are written for the sake of propaganda. So they want to get the propaganda into your children's eyes before you can do anything about it, as young as possible.
My ideal society would have urban youths reading the poem Beowulf in its original Old English and writing a detailed commentary on it. That's what I want.
I think you're being a bit ambitious there, Josh, but I respect what you're aiming for there. In fact, on the subject of the UK English curriculum, Connor wrote an excellent article about it 2 years ago now, so this is back from June 2022, so things have probably only got worse since then. But he points out here one of the most hit parts of the curriculum was the conflict section of the poetry side, because I remember back in my own secondary school during English literature, we learnt about Wilfred Owen. His poem's been taken out now. So they took out...
Why was that?
A Poison Tree by William Blake, The Man He Killed by Thomas Hardy, Punishment by Seamus Heaney, Phrase Book by Joe Shapcott, and Anthem for Doomed Youth by Wilfred Owen, which is one of the ones that I studied.
But there are loads of classic poets in there.
Yes, but you need to make room. It is a zero-sum game when you're working with limited time.
I'm going to be reading Tupac today, kids.
Close enough. Replacing them is Lewis Bennett's Colonization in Reverse. Actual propaganda telling young English kids that you deserve to be replaced. That's what that is. Literally, it's called colonization in reverse. And as school children, they'll have the teachers telling them what a good and wonderful thing that is happening, and they'll be using it in the sort of what's that French guy's name? No, he wasn't French. He was Brazilian or something. Paulo Freire, the pedagogy sense. They'll be using that and then
not the chef.
No, not the chef. They'll be using it as an opportunity to open up the conversation to the sins of imperialism and why it's actually a good thing that little Timmy is being replaced by Mbungu sat next to him. They've also got Ilya Kaminsky's Fantasy of the Fall of America in We Lived Happily During the War, Parable of Police Racial Profiling Caleb Femi's 13, and Francis E.W. Harper's Songs for the People, which is all just race propaganda for gay race communists.
I ain't never heard of them.
So they try and get them as soon as they can, as when they're as young as possible. That's one of the ways that they start to try and get kids to hate themselves for the colour of their skin, as long as you are white, as long as you are one of the many ethnic groups of the white race, specifically for here, English, although this goes on everywhere else as well. Interestingly as well, you get lots of things, even from the past, the new ideology being imposed upon old media, like in this, which came out just the other day, that one of the stars of Friends, which was always a rubbish show, let's be perfectly honest.
That's going to get some pushback.
It was terrible. Adam Goldberg slamming the show for its insane lack of diversity. Can you believe an all-white friendship group in New York in the 90s?
I mean, that probably still goes on now. Probably increasingly so, in fact.
Yeah. So you get in the schools, you get told that you don't have room for your culture's stories anymore. You have to move aside for the new culture's stories. The old culture's stories, even as recent as 30 years ago, are no longer fit for purpose because they don't fit into the new woke ideology. And then you start to see articles like this from The Guardian, self-reporting, saying, we each have a Nazi in us, we need to understand the psychological roots of authoritarianism.
By a top-down erasure of the native culture.
Yes, because neuroimaging studies, and we've covered this before, have shown that the amygdala, the tiny almond-shaped brain structure that mediates fear, it's actually more to do with risk management, is larger in people with more right-wing views. Yes, because you're more aware of risks around you and better able to plan for them.
Well, that's not necessarily a negative thing either. There could be more risks. I mean, being a dumb brain left-winger who doesn't see any risk in anything and walks down the wrong street and gets mugged and stabbed and killed.
Like has happened to a shocking amount of left-wing journalists.
Yes. That's not a good thing for them, not being able to perceive risk. And actually, being able to perceive risk is one of the most important aspects of survival in an organism, be it human or not. So it's a silly argument to make. Equally, being more risk averse makes you more likely to do things like not gamble away your money and be more responsible and find a more stable, sustainable income stream.
Which explains why leftists have such excellent lifestyles and judgment. And this article actually is quite interesting because it goes right to the foundations of a lot of the anti-white hatred that gets bandied about these days, which is that it refers straight back to a Frankfurt School social psychologist, Eric Fromm, and a lot of this really does come from the Frankfurt School. I know it's a bit of a meme, James Lindsay and people speak about them, but I don't think that they highlight the particularly bad parts of the Frankfurt School ideology that they developed and promoted in conjunction with, the US government, which is, thanks for that, Uncle Sam. It starts by saying, any attempt to understand the attraction which fascism exercises upon great nations compels us to recognize the role of psychological factors, according to Eric Fromm, German Jewish social psychologist, and he said that in 1941. Such factors are not specifically German or, say, Italian, nor were they manifestations of a unique historical era, now safely in the distant past. Not only can the malignant political, economic, ideological climates, whoever wrote this particular article, who is it? Gaber Matt really wanted to make sure you knew they were smart in this first paragraph. Required for the flowering of fascism to develop anywhere. So are its emotional dynamics present in the psyche of most human beings. So you're just evil, white man. It's deep inside your brain. You can't help it. You can't fix it. Evil is just there inherently as a result of your psychology. Not in anybody else, just the white people, though. Because you've got a malfunctioning amygdala because it actually works. So therefore, we've got to replace you. Sorry, bye-bye. We each have a Nazi within, according to Auschwitz survivor Edith Eger. That's a strange thing for an Auschwitz survivor to say.
That's why I laughed. It's just like, yes, sometimes I was in the camp, sometimes I was a guard.
Yeah, that's just absurd on the face of it. Not to diminish what she must have gone through, but good God. Pointing, in the authors of this article's observation, to a near universal reality. Okay. Many of us harbour the seeds for hatred, rage, fear, narcissistic self-regard and contempt for others that, in their most venomous and extreme forms, are the dominant emotional currents whose confluence can all feed the destructive torrent that we call fascism, given enough provocation or encouragement. That's right, if you're afraid of things or have any of these negative personal qualities, you too will come up with a specific anti-communist Italian political philosophy.
You too will get involved in trade unions, who are the root of your power base.
You too might end up reading Giovanni Gentili and wonder, what the hell is he talking about?
But also,
It's absurd.
The silly thing is, they're taking statistical generalizations and suggesting that because the method of data collection suggests a general trend, that this is true of everyone. Actually, no, there are plenty of people that are disposed not to have these things, and people can be born with dispositions that are not like that. You know, you only need to look at animals like dogs, for example. Dogs, you can argue, don't necessarily have the same level of socialization as most people. That's an important caveat. But they have different temperaments and personalities, even though they could be raised in the same environment, like a single litter, for example. They've got similar genes, similar environment, yet there's still some variations. And you can only really attribute that to variations in their genes, because they're not all identical, and that affects their personality. And therefore, this gets lost, that actually people might not be as similar, funnily enough, as they're making out.
But they do point out here that environment does also play a factor, which it absolutely does.
Of course, yeah.
And so what do you need to do if if everybody has the potential to be an evil Adolf Hitler? What do you do?
Well, the easiest thing to point out here is that you do whatever we were doing before the 20th century for thousands and thousands of years of human civilization.
No, because according to these people, the results of the 20th century in terms of Adolf Hitler was that it was a violent, evil, white nationalist pushback against the universally good, progressive future that we were heading into.
The Soviet Union?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So they say, nobody is born with rabid hatred, untrammeled rage, existential fear, or cold contempt permanently embedded in their minds or hearts. Permanently, doing a lot of lifting there. What they're saying is, you are born with it, but we could socially engineer it out of you. These fulminant emotions, when chronic, are responses to unbearable suffering endured at a time of utmost vulnerability, helplessness, and unrelieved threat. That is in early childhood. So what they're saying here is you could turn into a Nazi if you are, say, raised to be slightly more socially conservative by your parents, so we need to socially engineer you out of that as early as possible in the schools, and preferably just get you out of your parents' hands as early as possible as well. So that's why they aim all of this stuff at the kids, and it's interesting that this is the entire overtly and explicitly stated ideological reason for why they do this. If we don't trans your kids, if we don't make them hate themselves, if we don't tell them that all of the history of their ancestors, their race, and their culture are evil, they might turn into Adolf Hitler. Do you really believe that? Do you think that that is true? Do you think that a normal child, just without any intervention by the state or those external factors, is automatically going to turn into a genocidal maniac? No, of course not. They even say American psychologist Michael Milburn has studied the childhood antecedents of right-wing ideological rigidity. His research confirms that the harsher the parenting atmosphere...
Research can't confirm things. It suggests or supports a hypothesis. You cannot confirm things with just, one man's research, you moron. With
your own sociological background and psychological background. I can understand how this pisses you off. But they say his research suggests that the harsher the parenting atmosphere people were exposed to as young children, the more prone they are to support authoritarian or aggressive policies such as foreign wars, punitive laws, and the death penalty. So basically what they're saying is, the less boundaries you have in your childhood, the more left-wing you'll be. If we take you away from your parents, then you'll be more left-wing, and that's a good thing. And this actually refers back, echoes back to the work of the Frankfurt School, particularly Adorno with the authoritarian personality, where the studies that he did, the psychological interviews that he conducted, and along with some of the others...
We talked about this on the website, didn't we?
Yes, we have spoken about this on the website. Basically said that, well, if they had a positive view of their childhood, that means they were more authoritarian. He basically flipped all of the interviews on their head. If they had respect for their parents, if they had a stable childhood, if there were boundaries and authority that was respected, this was a sign of emotional instability and fascism. Whereas if you had the opposite, that was a sign of emotional stability and independence.
I'm a living rebuttal of this. I had in my opinion, a very, very good childhood, and I'm very grateful to my parents for being very responsible and, you know, making me very well behaved as a child. And I'm very anti-authoritarian. I really dislike government overreach. So how can I have this very rigid, structured childhood that I'm also fond of and think was good, and also be very anti-authoritarian? Surely that disproves all of this.
No, it was confirmed, so sorry, Josh.
Oh, it was
You're just the
confirmed,
exception that proves the rule. That must
Okay.
be it. But this is what's forced on children from a very, very young age, and has been for decades now. Remember, the Frankfurt School and their work with the American government and other governments was done back in the 40s and 50s. This has been the prevailing ideology. This has been the prevailing idea of government. The idea of government in the West for decades has been make sure white people hate themselves to prevent Hitler. That's what happened with the German experiments, where they were giving fostered children over to paedophiles in the hopes that the sexually liberated upbringing that would give them would prevent them from being Hitler, because it's all about repression and expression. So what does this lead to in the modern day and age? Well, it can manifest itself in funny ways. I'm not going to lie. The author of White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo, you know, that woman who said that she's really, really racist deep down, and that's why she needs to be an anti-racist, was tricked by Matt Walsh in his new film, Am I Racist?, into paying reparations to Matt Walsh's producer, who is a black guy.
fella, yeah.
Yeah.
It was hilarious. I've seen the video of it. He gives him money in front of her, and then she's like, oh, I don't have any money on me, and then she gets up and goes to her bag off camera.
Gives him $30.
I mean, that's quite nice of it.
I mean, I like the argument that Walsh did, was the argument that she would say, which is, you know, oh, I know this feels weird, but we need to be comfortable in being uncomfortable. So he threw her own language back at her, and she's so retarded that she fell for it and gave him the money, you know. So
this is where Matt Walsh is truly at his best, doing stuff like this.
Oh yeah, you know, people have criticised the idea of the film for saying, oh, it's so unserious, we've got to take these people seriously. No, we don't. We can have a laugh at their expense.
I think actually not treating their ideology as not serious is a good thing, but treating the implications of how it is implemented in our society seriously is actually very important. So you can make the distinction between the two.
Because it does also manifest itself in really awful and horrible ways, which is like the example I'm bringing up here, which is in Springfield, Ohio, last year, a boy called Aidan Clark was killed in a crash that we referenced in the last segment, where an unlicensed migrant, Hermanio Joseph, struck a school bus when he was driving in a minivan, and injured more than 20 students, and Aidan Clark himself was killed. According to this article, this was at the point where a lot of the people in the community, their attitude changed towards these. And of course, he's been used as a name by J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, others as saying this is what Kamala Harris's policies are going to bring to your community. Because if you're wondering, how could we have avoided this? Just don't have the Haitian migrants driving unlicensed in your town. Why should they be there in the very first place? Here's what the father had to say.
You know, I wish that my son, Aidan Clark, was killed by a 60-year-old white man. And I bet you never thought anyone would ever say something so blunt. But if that guy killed my 11-year-old son, the incessant group of hate-spewing people would leave us alone.
Yeah, obviously, it's terrible what happened to his son. I'm very sorry for him. But at the same time, you have been so brainwashed that what's more pressing to you right now is not that this was a completely avoidable problem, that decisions were made, policy decisions were made that led to the person being in your community who ended up killing your son. No, what actually matters is the racism that's being spewed at the other end of it. People saying, hey, isn't it terrible that a Haitian killed? No, I would have preferred if it was a 60-year-old white man. Well, too bad, it wasn't. It wasn't. And I'm sorry, you are spitting on the memory of your son, and you are also denying the actual problems that are happening in the rest of Springfield if you come out and say, oh, wouldn't it have been better?
It's a very weird thing to say, isn't it?
It's terrible. I don't want to use his son's grave to dance on. And I don't want other people to either, because obviously what he and his wife went through is terrible. But this is disgusting. This is disgusting. You as the father have at least a responsibility to protect your child. You couldn't do that in that circumstance. That's not your fault. But you have a responsibility after it to make sure it doesn't happen again. And you're not doing that. So this is the result of the cult of self-hatred, that people would rather wish in a fantasy land that imaginary events happened instead of acknowledging the problems that exist in our society today. These people have been brainwashed. I don't think there's any helping them. But you and I can move past the programming, move past the brainwashing, and maybe enact some change in the future.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, Harry produced a video on the history of the gay rights movement, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can follow us on Twitter where we post links to everything else. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.